On the 17th of April, 2026, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints walked into a federal courthouse in Utah and sued one of its most persistent critics. The man they sued is John Dehlin. He hosts a podcast called Mormon Stories, a show that spent 2 decades interviewing people about their doubts, their exits, and their grievances with the faith I belong to. And within days, a single framing hardened all over YouTube. It fits in one sentence. The Mormon Church is suing a podcaster into silence. One video with almost exactly that title has pulled close to 100,000 views, and it's a clean story, an emotional one, and it might even be true. But there are 2 ways to read a lawsuit. You can read what people say about it, or you can read what it actually asks a judge to do. And the filings in this case are public. So, is the church really suing a podcaster into silence? Let's go to the facts. Before we crack open a single document, let me put my cards on the table, because on a story like this, you deserve to know who's talking to you. I'm a believing Latter-day Saint. The institution that filed this lawsuit is my church, and you should weigh every word I say tonight with that in mind. So my promise on this channel matters even more than usual here, and it's the same one as always. I will take the question seriously, treat every side fairly, and stay faithful without getting loud about it. And on this topic, that promise comes down to 3 things. I'll only tell you what the public filings and solid reporting support, and I'll name the source out loud as we go. I'll build the censorship case at its strongest before I answer one word of it. And where the honest answer is that I don't know, I'll say I don't know. One quick thing before we dig in. This channel is still young, and it's here for one reason: to tell the story of this faith honestly, hard parts and all, and to get the word of the restoration to people who only ever got handed a caricature of it. If that's something you want to see grow, a like and a subscribe really do help a small channel find its feet. And do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Knowing who's out there changes how this room feels. Here's how I want to do this. We'll start with what happened. The dates and documents the loud takes skip over. Then I want to untangle something, because the headlines blend 2 different kinds of law together: a fight over a trademark and a fight over free speech. And once you can tell those apart, the whole thing changes. Then I'm going to turn around and argue against my own side. I'll make the case that this really is censorship as hard as I can. And then, only then, we hold it up against the record and see if it survives. And hang on to one strange little fact while we go. Back in 2018, this same church stood up and told the world to stop using the very word it's now in court fighting over. It keeps coming back, and it stings a little more each time. Let's start with the man being sued, because if he's just a podcaster to you, you can't judge this fairly. John Dehlin started Mormon Stories in 2005. And here's a detail the angriest voices on my side love to skip. He didn't start it as a critic. He started it as an active, believing member. A psychology grad student recording long interviews about faith and doubt. That's from Slate's profile of the case. Over the years, the show drifted with him, further and further from the church, into interviews with scholars, critics, and people heading for the door. In 2015, the church excommunicated him. If you're outside this faith, excommunication just means formal removal from membership, the strongest discipline the church has. And the podcast kept going. It's past 2,000 episodes now. Slate calls it the most prolific and longest-running show in the ex-Mormon lane. So whatever you think of where he landed, he's not some fringe account the church tripped over. He's the most prominent, critical voice in this corner of the internet, and the church knows it. Which is why that framing question writes itself. And here's something the headlines get slightly wrong. Who's doing the suing? It wasn't just the church. The suit was filed by the church together with a company called Intellectual Reserve, Incorporated. That name is new to just about everybody. Intellectual Reserve is the church's intellectual property arm, the entity that owns and manages the trademarks and copyrights, the names, the logos, the photographs. When any big institution defends its brand, this is the kind of entity whose name ends up on the papers. And the lawsuit wasn't the opening move either. Reporting in the Deseret News and Mormon Story's own published timeline both put the first real contact in November of 2025. That's when the church's intellectual property office sent Dehlin's nonprofit, the Open Stories Foundation, a letter laying out its branding concerns. And Dehlin's team responded. According to KSL, the Salt Lake City station, they changed their logo's color to orange and reworked its style. And Dehlin says they added the church's preferred disclaimer language, a line making clear the show is not affiliated with the church, into the podcast description on every platform. Early in 2026, the two sides sat down to mediate. Mediation is just a private negotiation with a neutral person in the middle, a chance to settle before anybody sues. By March, it had fallen apart. Dehlin put it bluntly. The church's demands were just too unreasonable, and we walked away. And on the 17th of April, the church filed suit in the United States District Court for the District of Utah. So what does the complaint actually claim? According to the Deseret News, there are 4 counts. There's federal trademark infringement. There's false designation of origin under the Lanham Act. There's trademark infringement under Utah state law. And there's copyright infringement. The Lanham Act is just the federal law that governs trademarks. And false designation of origin, in plain English, means packaging that tricks people about who's really behind a product. Here's what they're pointing at. The complaint says that back in December of 2022, Mormon Stories switched to a blue logo whose fonts and light ray design look like the church's own family of logos. It says images on the show's YouTube channel have borrowed pieces of the Christus, that white marble statue of Christ with the open arms the church uses as an emblem. It says the show ran copyrighted church photographs without permission, including pictures of church leaders at General Conference. And it says people really were confused. The complaint quotes viewer comments as evidence. One asks, is this channel run by Mormons, or ex-Mormons, or people who are Mormons but against radical Mormons? But all of that is just the grievance. The thing that actually decides this episode is a different question. What is the complaint asking the judge to do? Because a lawsuit has to write its wish list down somewhere, in a section literally called the prayer for relief. That's the closing pages where you tell the judge what you want. And according to the Deseret News, what this one wants is an order to permanently enjoin, which is lawyer for permanently stop, the use of any marks or names or designs confusingly similar to the church's, plus any use of the church's copyrighted images to promote the show. But what it doesn't ask for, that's the whole thing. It does not ask the court to pull the podcast offline. It does not ask for a single episode to be deleted. It does not ask that John Dehlin stop criticizing the church or soften one argument he's ever made. And the church's public statement leans on exactly that line. This case concerns branding choices that incorporate church-protected names and design elements in ways that may lead people to believe the podcast is produced by or affiliated with the church, when it is not. Dehlin isn't buying any of it. "We disagree with their allegations of confusion," he said when the suit landed. And on the 22nd of June, he hit back in court with a counterclaim of his own. So he's not just playing defense, he's suing them right back. The Salt Lake Tribune boiled his argument down to 6 words. You don't own the word Mormon. His side says the term is a religious and cultural identity no single institution gets to fence off. The same way no church owns the words Christian or Catholic or Jewish or Muslim. That's a comparison Mormon Stories makes itself in its own public explainer of the countersuit. And then it goes further, and this part is sharper. It says the church abandoned the Mormon trademark, and that any registrations resting on it are invalid because of that abandonment. Hang on to that one. We're circling back to it. Because as I'm recording this, in July of 2026, all we've got is a complaint, an answer, and a counterclaim. No judge has ruled on a thing. Whatever some video tells you this means, there is no outcome yet. This fight is just getting started. But you can't judge a fight until you know what kind of fight it is. And that's where most of the confusion lives. Because 2 different things are getting jammed together here. So let me pull them apart, because this distinction does more work than any other fact in the story. Start with copyright, because copyright's the easy one. It's owning a specific thing somebody made. Think a photograph somebody snapped, a book somebody wrote, a hymn somebody composed. A copyright claim basically says, hey, you used my work and you didn't ask. So when the church says Mormon Stories put its general conference photographs into thumbnails, that's a copyright claim. Narrow, ordinary, boring. It's the same complaint a wedding photographer makes when a company lifts her picture for an ad. A trademark is weirder, and it's the heart of this case. A trademark is not owning a word the way you own your car. It's owning a signal, a name, a logo, a color scheme, some design that tells everybody who a product comes from. Trademark law exists to stop customers getting fooled about where something came from. That's why the legal test keeps circling one idea: the likelihood of confusion. A trademark claim is saying, the way you've dressed yourself up makes people think you're me, or that I put my stamp on you. And free speech is a completely different animal. When people say free speech in America, they usually mean the First Amendment, the rule that the government can't punish you for your opinions or your criticism. But look at who that rule holds back: the government. A church suing a critic is not the state throwing a dissident in jail. And losing a fight over a logo is not a law banning an idea. That doesn't mean the First Amendment sits this one out. Judges still have to apply trademark and copyright law in a way that leaves room to comment and criticize. That's why we have a thing called fair use. Fair use is the rule that lets you reuse protected material without asking, for stuff like criticism, news, and commentary. And Dehlin leans on fair use for the photographs. His side says the church's actions raise serious First Amendment concerns that go well past his own show. So here's the cleanest way to put the difference. A free speech fight is about what you're allowed to say. A trademark fight is about what you're allowed to look like while you say it. And in theory, you can lose a trademark case completely and still say every word you were saying the day before. You just say it under a different logo with different pictures. And if that's how it works here, then suing a podcaster into silence is flat out the wrong description of this lawsuit, and we could all go home early. But I promised you I'd be fair, and there's a real complication. That clean version only works if you can pull the packaging apart from the message. So what happens when the packaging they're fighting over is the name of the show itself? And the name honestly describes what the show is. Because Mormon Stories is, quite literally, a podcast of stories about Mormons. You take a descriptive name a critic has carried for 20 years, and strip it off him, and you've done a lot more than tweak his fonts. That's the seam where this case stops being tidy. And that's exactly where the censorship argument climbs in through the window. So let's build that argument for real. The strongest, honest case that my own church is in the wrong here. Because if I hand you some cardboard version of it, you should distrust every word I say after. Start with the sheer imbalance, because every critic starts there, and they should. This is one of the richest religious institutions on the planet, dragging a non-profit podcast into federal court. And even if every claim in that complaint were modest, the lawsuit itself is a weapon. Take discovery, the phase where each side gets to demand the other side's internal documents. That alone can grind on for years, and behind it, depositions, expert witnesses, legal bills that outlast the news cycle. You can win a case like this and still get wrecked by the cost of winning. Critics have a name for that. They call it the process is the punishment. You don't need a judge to order anybody silent when the price of speaking is 5 years in court. And if you're being fair, you have to admit it. A giant suing a critic puts a pressure on him the giant will never feel in reverse. Second, the history of the word itself. And I'll be straight with you. This is the part I find most uncomfortable. Back in 2018, President Russell Nelson steered the church away from the word Mormon entirely. The style guide changed. Institutions got renamed. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir, one of the most famous brand names in American religion, became the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. And President Nelson, in a general conference talk, said using the nickname was, and these are his words, a victory for Satan. Slate's reporting leans hard on that history, and you can see why. Here's an institution that spent years telling the world, please stop calling us Mormon. We're setting that name down. And then, 7 years later, it walks into a courthouse to stop a critic from using it. To a skeptic, that doesn't look like protecting a brand you actually use. It looks like reaching back to grab a stick you'd already thrown away. because a critic was getting mileage out of it. Third, the private demands. The public complaint reads narrow, but according to Dehlin's account of the mediation, which Slate reported, the church's lawyers wanted a lot more than a color swap. They wanted the word Mormon gone from the show's name altogether. They were floating alternatives, things like Ex-Mormon Stories with Dr. John Dehlin. I want to be clear, this is one side's version of a confidential negotiation. But if it's accurate, that polite line about fonts and light rays really undersells what was on the table. A logo you can change by Friday, but the name is the show. The second you demand the name, you're not negotiating over his packaging anymore. You're negotiating over the man's identity. Fourth, look at who got picked. The word Mormon sits in the names of podcasts and blogs and businesses all over this cultural space. And the one that got sued is the biggest critical one. The church says this is about branding, not viewpoint. And the skeptic comes back with a question that's hard to shake off. If a faith-promoting podcast had the same blue logo and the same kind of name, would it have ended up in federal court? I can't tell you. Neither can you. And that's the point. The fact that this one defendant got singled out quietly colors how everybody reads the motive. And fifth, the experts. Because this isn't just YouTube talking anymore. Rebecca Tushnet, a Harvard law professor who works on trademark and the First Amendment, told Slate that Mormon Stories seems to truthfully describe the contents of the show, even if there's momentary confusion. And she warned that if the court sees this suit as an attempt to suppress criticism, it might not accept the confusion allegations at all. Then Jake Linford, a law professor at Florida State and a Latter-day Saint himself, said Dehlin seems like he ought to be able to use the term Mormon, and that a flat ban on the word goes, in his words, way too far. And when scholars inside and outside your own faith flinch at the same piece of your lawsuit, that piece has a problem. Now put all five together, and the censorship read stops sounding like hysteria. It starts sounding like what it is, a serious argument made by serious people sitting on real facts. You've got an institution with enormous resources against one lone critic, private demands that reach the critic's own name, a word the institution itself renounced, and legal scholars saying the core claim overreaches. And if you're a member of my church, and your gut reaction is to wave all of that off, I'd gently point out that's loyalty talking, not analysis. The optics here are genuinely bad. A church our size filing on a podcaster looks like Goliath filing on David, and pretending otherwise convinces nobody who wasn't already convinced. We don't get to skip this one. We have to answer it. So does the record back up the phrase, everybody's sharing? Here's where I owe those filings the same tough treatment I just gave the critics. Let's take that sentence apart, word by word. The church is suing a podcaster into silence. Suing, that's accurate. A podcaster, also accurate. But into silence. That's the part you can test. Because remember the rule from the top of the episode. Not what people say about the lawsuit, but what the lawsuit asks a judge to do. And what this one asks for, as reported by the Deseret News, is an order to stop using confusingly similar marks and designs, and to stop using the church's copyrighted images to promote the show. So say the church wins every line of that tomorrow. Mormon Stories could still publish the same episodes, the same interviews, the same criticisms, same host, same audience, just under different artwork. The one piece that does cut deeper is the name. But even there, the fight is over the brand on the door, never over one sentence spoken inside. Nowhere in that filing, as reported, does anybody ask for a critic to be quieted. The phrase, "everybody's sharing," describes a remedy nobody ever asked for. And that's the misrepresentation at the center of this whole thing. And it matters way beyond this one case. Because if every trademark filing counts as silencing, then the word silencing stops meaning anything. We'll have spent it before the day some institution actually tries to silence somebody. Second, look at the runway. The record shows a letter back in November of 2025, then changes made in response, then months of mediation, and a lawsuit filed only after all of that broke down. That's slower and quieter than the ambush the headline wants you to picture. And I'll give you the counter-argument right away because it's fair. A long negotiation can be its own kind of pressure, especially if the demands keep getting bigger. But an institution that actually wanted somebody silenced had blunter tools right there. Instead, it spent months haggling over logo colors and disclaimers with its most famous critic. Whatever that is, it is not a gag order in a hurry. Third, and this cuts both ways, some of the ground in that complaint Dehlin has already given up in practice. According to KSL, his team changed the logo the first time they were asked. On the photographs, his stance is, "We believe our use qualifies as fair use." And yet he agreed to pull the specific images the church pointed to. He added disclaimers, though he pushed back when the church wanted them bigger and louder, saying, "We don't want our primary message to be about what we are not." Which, honestly, is a fair thing to want for your own show. Concessions are not confessions. But they tell you both sides knew some of this material sat close to a real line. The confusion question wasn't conjured out of thin air. The complaint quotes actual viewers who were confused. Whether that confusion is legally enough, that's what courts exist to decide. And no court has decided it yet. Which brings us to the real heart of the case, the word itself. And here I've got to disappoint anybody who showed up for a victory lap. On the one question everybody actually cares about, whether the church can stop a critic from using the word Mormon in a name that just describes his show, the record, as it sits today, leans against my church. The experts I quoted a minute ago doubt it. The First Amendment pressure on trademark law pushes against it. And that abandonment counterclaim has real teeth for the simplest reason. The church's own 2018 retreat from the word is in the public record, tons of it. That's the fact I told you to keep in your pocket, doing its heaviest lifting. You cannot spend years teaching the world that a name doesn't represent you anymore, and then convince a judge that a critic using it confuses the public about your endorsement. If the church loses that piece of this case, it'll have partly done it to itself, from a pulpit in 2018. And I'm a believing member saying that out loud. Because fair is fair. And one last entry for the silence ledger, maybe the loudest one. As I'm recording this, Mormon Stories has not gone quiet by any measure that exists. The show is publishing. It filed a countersuit. Slate reported that Dehlin's video responding to the lawsuit pulled 135,000 views in a week, which is almost certainly more attention than that disputed logo ever got him. Lawyers have a name for this, borrowed from internet history. They call it the Streisand effect, where the harder you try to control a thing, the more you amplify it. So if silence was the goal, this lawsuit is failing at it spectacularly, out in public, in real time. So here's where I land, and I want you checking it against the documents, not your loyalty or mine. Did the church file a real federal lawsuit against a real critic? Yes. Do the filings ask for anybody to be silenced? No. On paper, what they ask for is different logos, different photographs, and, the most aggressive one, a different name. And that last demand is the one place where the critics hold the stronger legal argument right now, and where my own church's 2018 words might cost it dearly. Is the framing, suing a podcaster into silence, supported by the record? It is not. It describes a remedy nobody has asked any court to grant. And are the optics still terrible? Yes, both of those last two things are true at the same time. And the second our side refuses to admit the second one, we lose the credibility we need to say the first. A headline tells you what people say about a lawsuit. The filing tells you what was actually asked. So read the filing. Which leaves the one question I can't settle for you, because it was never a question of fact. Every institution you respect protects its name. Every free society protects its critics. And somewhere between those two runs a line. And this case will come down to where a federal judge in Utah draws it. But before the judge answers, I want your answer. Where's the line between protecting a name and silencing a critic? Where would you draw it? Put it in the comments, and be good to each other down there, because this topic deserves better than a shouting match. The case is live, and when the court rules, I'll come back and tell you what it ruled, whichever way it cuts. And if you want to go deeper tonight, the complaint and counterclaim are both public records. The Deseret News, a paper the church owns, and the Salt Lake Tribune, a paper it does not, have both covered this case closely, and Mormon Stories has published its whole side. Read both sides. That habit is the entire spirit of this channel. And if you're new here, my episode on everything Johnny Harris gets wrong about Latter-day Saints pairs well with this one. Same discipline, aimed at a friendlier fight. I'm Nathan Reeves. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.